It was a typical Wednesday night, and I was winding down after a long day at work. My small apartment on the outskirts of the city was a haven of peace and quiet, perfect for my introverted lifestyle. I was nestled comfortably on the couch with a book, the soft hum of my favorite playlist filling the room. The clock ticked past midnight when I first heard it, a faint, almost imperceptible knocking at the front door. At first, I thought I was imagining things. I put down my book and listened intently, but the knocking stopped. I shrugged it off as the creaks and groans of an old building settling. But a few minutes later, it started again, more insistent this time. I felt a chill run down my spine as I approached the door. Peering through the peephole, I saw nothing but darkness. I hesitated, considering whether to open the door. The knocking grew louder, more urgent. Gathering my courage, I unlocked the door and slowly opened it, expecting to find a neighbor or perhaps someone in need. Instead, I saw a small child standing in the dimly lit hallway. She couldn't have been more than 8 years old, dressed in an old-fashioned white nightgown that looked oddly out of place. Her eyes were large and vacant, staring up at me without a trace of emotion. "Can I come in?" she asked in a flat, monotone voice. Something about her presence felt wrong, but my instincts as a decent human being kicked in. I knelt down to her level, trying to offer a reassuring smile. "Are you lost?" I asked. "Where are your parents?" She didn't respond, just continued to stare at me with those unsettling eyes. I glanced down the hallway, expecting to see someone looking for her, but it was empty. The silence was unnerving. I decided to bring her inside, figuring I could call the police and let them handle it. As she stepped into my apartment, I felt an inexplicable sense of dread. She walked slowly, almost mechanically, and sat down on the couch without a word. I reached for my phone and dialed 911, explaining the situation to the operator. They assured me that an officer would be dispatched to my address immediately. While waiting for the police, I tried to engage the girl in conversation, but she remained silent, her eyes fixed on the far corner of the room. The temperature seemed to drop, and I shivered despite the heater running. I decided to make her a cup of hot cocoa, hoping it might bring some warmth to the eeriness that had settled in my home. As I stirred the cocoa, I glanced back at her. She was gone. My heart skipped a beat, and I rushed into the living room, calling out for her. The apartment was small, with nowhere to hide, but she had vanished. I checked every room, even the closets and under the bed, but there was no sign of her. A loud knock at the door made me jump. It was the police officer. I quickly explained what had happened, but he looked skeptical as he glanced around my apartment. We searched again together, but it was as if the girl had never been there. There were no signs of her, no footprints, nothing. The officer left, advising me to get some rest and call if anything else happened. I locked the door behind him, feeling more uneasy than ever. As I returned to the living room, I noticed something that sent a chill down my spine. The hot cocoa I had made for the girl was still there, untouched, but the spoon was missing. I didn't sleep that night, haunted by the image of those empty eyes, and the sense of cold that had permeated my apartment. In the days that followed, strange things continued to happen. I would find objects moved, hear faint whispers in the dead of night, and feel a constant, unsettling presence. I tried to research any history about the building, hoping to find some explanation, but came up empty-handed. The encounters never stopped, and I began to fear that I would never have peace again. The strange child in the dark had left a mark on my home and my sanity, a haunting reminder that some doors, once opened, can never be closed.
It started off as just another Friday evening. I had finished my work for the week and was looking forward to a quiet night at home. My new house, a cozy bungalow on the edge of town, had a large backyard that I was particularly fond of. It was perfect for late-night bonfires and weekend barbecues. But that night, the backyard took on a different, more sinister atmosphere. I was lounging on the couch, flipping through channels, when I heard a strange noise coming from the backyard. It was a low, rhythmic thumping sound, almost like a heartbeat. I muted the TV and listened intently. The sound continued, faint but unmistakable. Curious and slightly unnerved, I grabbed a flashlight and headed towards the back door, stepping outside. The cool night air sent a shiver down my spine. The backyard was bathed in the eerie glow of the moon, casting long, dark shadows. I scanned the area with my flashlight, but everything seemed normal at first glance. The thumping sound had stopped, replaced by the familiar nighttime chorus of crickets and distant traffic. Just as I was about to go back inside, I noticed something odd near the old oak tree at the far end of the yard. The ground seemed disturbed, as if something had been digging there. I approached cautiously, my flashlight beam illuminating the freshly turned soil. My heart began to race as I saw what looked like claw marks gouged into the earth. I knelt down for a closer look, and a sudden, cold gust of wind sent leaves skittering across the yard. The claw marks were deep and uneven, far too large to be made by any animal I could think of. As I stood up, the thumping sound resumed, louder and more insistent. It seemed to be coming from beneath the ground. Panic set in, and I sprinted back to the house, locking the door behind me. I grabbed my phone and called my friend Mark, who lived nearby. He was a practical guy, not easily rattled, and I hoped he could help me make sense of what was happening. He agreed to come over and take a look. Mark arrived about 20 minutes later, armed with a shovel and a skeptical expression. I led him to the disturbed patch of ground, and he examined it carefully. It could be an animal, he said, though he didn't sound entirely convinced. Let's dig a bit and see if we can find anything. We began to dig, the flashlight casting long shadows as we worked. The thumping sound grew louder, and the earth seemed to pulse beneath our feet. After a few minutes, the shovel hit something hard. We exchanged a worried glance and continued to dig, eventually uncovering a small, ornate box. It was old and intricately carved, with strange symbols I didn't recognize. Mark pried the box open, revealing a collection of yellowed papers and a small, rusted key. As we sifted through the papers, we realized they were written in a language neither of us could understand. The key, however, seemed to radiate a strange warmth, almost as if it were alive. Suddenly, the ground beneath us shook violently, and the box was yanked from our hands by an unseen force. The thumping grew deafening, and a chilling wind swirled around us. We stumbled back, watching in horror as the box and its contents were swallowed by the earth. Mark and I ran back to the house. Slamming the door shut behind us, we stood there, panting and wide-eyed, trying to process what had just happened. The thumping sound had stopped, leaving an eerie silence in its wake. Over the next few days, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Shadows seemed to move on their own, and strange noises echoed through the house at night. I contacted a local historian, who told me that my property was once part of an old settlement, rumored to be cursed by its original inhabitants. To this day, I avoid the backyard after dark. The memories of that night still haunt me, and I can't help but wonder what we unearthed and whether it will return. The thumping may have stopped, but the sense of dread remains, a constant reminder that some mysteries are better left buried.
It started on a crisp autumn evening, just as the leaves began to turn a fiery red and gold. I had recently moved into a quaint old house at the edge of town, eager for a fresh start. The house, with its charming creaks and vintage fixtures, seemed perfect, except for one unsettling feature, the massive, gnarled tree that loomed in the backyard. During the day, the tree was just another part of the landscape, its twisted branches reaching toward the sky like skeletal fingers. But at night, it took on a far more sinister presence. The first time I noticed something odd was on a particularly windy night. I was reading in the living room when I heard a strange scraping noise against the window. I glanced up, expecting to see a branch swaying in the wind, but the tree was still. The noise stopped, and I convinced myself it was just my imagination. As the weeks passed, the sounds grew more frequent and unsettling. I heard whispers, like hushed voices carried on the breeze, and the scraping became more pronounced, almost purposeful. One night, I decided to investigate. Armed with a flashlight, I stepped outside into the chilly darkness. The tree stood silently, its branches swaying gently in the breeze. I approached cautiously, my heart pounding in my chest. Just as I reached out to touch the trunk, a low creaking sound echoed through the yard, and the branches seemed to move, reaching toward me. I stumbled back, convinced my mind was playing tricks on me. Determined to get to the bottom of it, I set up a camera facing the tree, hoping to catch any movement. The next morning, I eagerly reviewed the footage. At first, everything seemed normal, just the usual rustling of leaves in the wind. But then, around midnight, the tree's branches began to move in a way that defied nature. They twisted and curled, almost as if they were alive, reaching toward the house with a slow, deliberate motion. My blood ran cold as I watched the sinister dance. I couldn't ignore it any longer. I started researching the history of the house and the tree. I discovered that the tree was over 100 years old, and there were rumors among the locals about its dark past. According to legend, the tree had been planted by a man who practiced dark magic. He had been shunned by the town, and in his final act of vengeance, he cursed the tree, binding his malevolent spirit to it. Over the years, several families had lived in the house, each leaving abruptly with vague explanations about strange occurrences. One stormy night, the sinister activity reached a terrifying climax. I was jolted awake by a loud crash, followed by the sound of breaking glass. Heart racing, I grabbed the flashlight and ran downstairs. The living room window was shattered, and the tree's branches were inside, writhing like snakes. I backed away, stumbling over the furniture, as the branches stretched further into the room, their bark splitting to reveal grotesque, hand-like appendages. I fled to the kitchen, grabbed a large knife, and frantically began hacking at the branches. They recoiled with a screech, retreating through the window. I could hear the tree groaning outside, its branches thrashing wildly. Fueled by adrenaline and fear, I ran outside into the storm and, with reckless determination, set fire to the tree. The flames licked at the twisted wood, and I could hear what sounded like a scream, a mournful wail carried on the wind. The fire department arrived just in time to save the house, but the tree was reduced to ashes. In the aftermath, the eerie sounds and movements ceased. The house felt lighter, as if a dark cloud had lifted. I stayed, determined not to let the sinister presence drive me away. Yet, even now, on stormy nights, I sometimes think I hear the faint whisper of the tree's curse, lingering in the wind, reminding me that some shadows never truly fade.